So I get this email from WMAL program director Bill Hess yesterday telling me, Dave, you're hyping things too much. You're hyping things too much just for ratings. You're not worried about the reality and the truthfulness of what you're posting. You know, I ran this thing about how WMAL morning host Brian Wilson might be feuding with new co-host Larry O'Connor, who they announced early November that he was joining the guy from Big Breitbart thingy. I don't know what. But Breitbart TV or whatever. Anyhow, if you listen to the first couple shows, you know, Larry O'Connor's a very polished radio presenter, and he kind of overshadows Brian Wilson. And you know Brian Wilson has kind of a temper from all of his days at Fox and Channel 5. I've heard that from many people. And you just put two and two together and you go, you know, this marriage isn't quite made in heaven. And Bill Hess is kind of emailing me like going, well, you know, they both are type A personalities, but we'll work things out. And of course, Larry O'Connor hasn't been on the show for the last couple of days, and he's just taking more time with his family. But the interesting thing is how Bill Hess would slam me, little old me, for hyping something without, you know, maybe looking at the full truthfulness of it, when he's doing exactly the same thing on WMAL this week. You know, Obama won Virginia. Okay, he did, fairly substantially. It wasn't razor thin, you know, but he won a couple percentage points, you know. And with every election, when you go, you know, there's always certain amounts of people that show up at a polling place that are kind of, they don't have ID, or they can't tell the address they live at or whatever. There's something questionable. And in Virginia, they have a thing called a provisional ballot. And if the poll people, you know, find a question with somebody's ID, or maybe they doubt whether they're really the person who's, you know, there on the voting list ready, you know, to vote, they'll have them do a provisional ballot, which means your ballot then gets put in a pile and it gets looked at a little more carefully. They look at the different circumstances. And I was listening to one of the radio shows, and they said that something like 40 to 60% of all provisional ballots don't eventually get counted. Okay, that's the way the system works, to check whether there's any kind of fraudulent or questionable activities. And the fact that 40 to 60% of those ballots don't get counted says, hey, you know, the system may not be perfect, but it works, generally speaking. Now, does it get every case of voter fraud, or where somebody's pretending to be somebody they're not, or whatever? Probably not. But generally speaking, it works. And in this past election, there hasn't been even a single documented case, you know, or, you know, where the state has brought a charge of voter fraud against a voter. You know, it hasn't happened once. So WMAL a couple weeks ago takes this lady who is a poll watcher, one of these polls somewhere in Northern Virginia, and she claims, well, you know, there's a bunch, I saw people that there was a Hispanic man, and he had an Anglo name, and he looked, it's supposedly he was supposed to be 45, and he looked 18, and we just let them vote because we were rushed, you know, and okay. All right, so some of that might have happened, who knows, you know, but now the whole thing that WMAL is doing is saying, well, wait a minute, these are heavily Obama areas, you know, Northern Virginia went for Obama by a substantial amount, so maybe Obama didn't really win, maybe he didn't really win, and they're screaming and yelling and doing this thing, and then they have Ken Cuccinelli, who's a Tea Party guy, real right-winger, who comes on the radio station. He uses WMAL a lot, he's on there a lot, you know, and he's, you know, basically saying, well, you know, it's not really his case to make unless somebody files a complaint, because he's just the attorney general. He's not the cop, so to speak. But he does agree, he hints very heavily in his little interview last week that he agrees that Obama, there was a lot of voter fraud in Virginia. Which is kind of, you know, for an attorney general to say that without any evidence, it just shows how this guy shoots from the hip, and, you know, probably is kind of a, I don't know, is that the kind of guy you want as your governor? So anyhow, WMAL does this story a week ago Tuesday, and we covered it. I think there are a few mentions of it in the mailbag. I put a few Facebook posts about it, but it didn't really, it just kind of flew by the radar. And then all of a sudden this week, a week later, you know, media, New York Times, a bunch of different groups, Huffington Post, bunch of different mainly liberal-leaning websites are there. Somebody said, hey, look at this. And, you know, it spread this around to all these sites, and they're really kind of trashing Cuccinelli, making him look like an idiot, and bringing up this WMAL interview a week later. And so now WMAL is trying to make the most out of it. And then WMAL's backsliding. They're trying to say, the media's not covering us adequately. We're not, we didn't mean to say this. We meant to say that. Well, WMAL, half their stuff they misrepresent. It's like they misrepresent what goes on out there, and then now they get covered under the microscope, and the media is misrepresenting what they say. So it's kind of all comes around, goes around, doesn't it? But in any respect, they're just hyping themselves. Poor WMAL, which the ratings aren't great. The Washington area votes heavily for Obama, even though they're sitting there screaming against it. Kind of a powerless, irrelevant little station. And now, Brian Wilson is on the air this morning. Well, look how powerful we are. Everybody's paying attention to us. Yeah, for 5 minutes yesterday. Chris Matthews on MSNBC. They're all categorizing MAL and Cuccinelli as being these kind of wing nuts. I'll tell you something, WMAL, I don't care. Obama's going to he's going to have a second term. That's that. You're not going to change it. Even if you come up with 100 cases of voter fraud in Virginia, which there probably weren't, but, it's still not going to change things. But it is kind of funny watching, so Bill Hess and WMAL are doing the same thing that we're doing here. We're trying to hype things. And that's what the media does. That's what the web people do and everything. They hype things. So, again, I have to turn back to the old gray lady, the Washington Post, and say, this would have been a good story for Paul Farhi to have done maybe last week. If he was an enterprising reporter worth his salt, he would have jumped on this story a week ago, and boom, he would have led the pack on it, and he didn't. Because the Washington Post doesn't care about local media news. They rather just report about big, all they want to do is they send Farhi out on to do stories that have something to do with something that'll get a lot of hits on the website from people outside the Washington area, drudge links and stuff like that. So you get a Farhi piece, almost a canned-looking piece on how TV stations in small markets take prepackaged news, and they oftentimes report it verbatimly the same, like those Conan O'Brien video clips, where they show an anchor from Des Moines and an anchor from Spokane, literally reading the same script because it's pre-prepared, because these local stations, don't have the staff to cover bigger stories, so they get prepackaged news, which is not a big deal, and it's something that's been happening for years and really isn't that big of a news. But that's big Paul Farhi's story today in the Post, and the WMAL story, which is probably which the Post missed. They just kind of went whoops, but that's the Post. All right, folks. Oh wait, yeah, this is Dave TV for the 28th of November, 2012. But it's just crazy, isn't it? These radio people are crazy. I still think Brian Wilson and Larry O'Connor are feuding. It's going to be fun. You can just hear it when these two guys are on the air together. You can just hear that they hate each other. Stop listening to I listen to, I don't know. Hey. Maybe I shouldn't listen anymore, but put on MSNBC for a while in the mornings. I do this. I notice this. I'm always scratching my right ear. Book 'em, Dano.